Okay, we're live. Welcome back to the Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football Podcast. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got a great episode this week with a very special guest, Zach Reed. Good evening, Zach. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me on, fellas. This is great. I'm pumped to go live. This is good.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So before we get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where we can find you, all that good stuff.
I am one of the co-hosts of the Dynasty Dummies podcast, the lesser of the two co-hosts. You really want to be following Kyle at Caleb Breck. He's the man who drives the machine, and I'm just kind of clinging on for dear life. But we're over at the DFPN Network. We got a whole bunch of great shows over there, including Mike, John McCann, who hosts the Open Bar, does a show on the DFPN Network feed, and the Blitz, the Dummy Blitz, and it is the best show. He did 15 minutes, and he asked all the questions that you never knew you needed the answer to, but then you have to figure out the answers. But he asked the questions, and to me, that's even more valuable. So that's really it's not about me. I'm just the dummy, man.
Oh, that's great. That's how I feel every day too, so it's fine. I think we're in the same boat there. But yeah, thanks for coming on. We've got a great show tonight. We are doing a little quarter season pause here. Take a little break. We're quarter way through the fantasy season here, and we're going to do a little rookie review tonight, talking about where we think the rookies are, how they perform so far. We'll kind of hit our highlights and maybe talk about where we see these rookies finishing, or if there's some late bloomers, so to speak, that are going to be coming on later in the season. We'll get into all that. But first things first, Jacob, my co-host.
Yes, sir.
What are you drinking tonight?
I am throwing down, because of course it's Oktoberfest season, I am doing a raised grain Doctoberfest, which I just learned before coming on air here, that this is apparently named Doctoberfest because it's brewed by two doctors. But I was dumb and didn't realize that until just 8 moments ago.
Yeah, and it was great. I told Jake I wish we would have been recording when he had that realization, because the surprise in his voice was just gold. It was great.
You don't get to genuinely be shocked by such small things as that too often in this life. So you have to enjoy them when they occur.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, I am drinking a nice thick coffee stout as the weather's starting to turn here in the Midwest. Although by today you wouldn't know it. It was actually fairly nice out. But this weekend it was nice and chilly. And so I grabbed a nice coffee stout to get me through these cooler days and nights. And it is just a delicious beer. You can't go wrong with coffee stout. Winter, it all goes together. So I really like this beer. It is just fantastic.
Gives you a little perk, a little pick-me-up, if you will. Now, I think for our next segment that person that we're going to be talking about probably could have used a little perk. I'm just spoiler alert.
Yes, our drunk trade of the week. So this one comes from at Chris Moxley. So Chris traded Zach Ertz for a 2021 second, a 2022 second, and Chris Herndon.
Now, this occurred this past offseason, okay? So this was right before the actual season started. I wanted to include this one this week because you fellas, I need to know two things. One, where you might have fallen, and be honest, where you might have fallen on this trade in the offseason, and then where you fall on this trade now that we have 4 weeks of information, in particular about Zach Ertz. So, Zach, I would like you, since you share a namesake here, to give us an honest reaction here. So, number one, how do you feel at the time, so at some point in this offseason, that this went for the trader of Zach Ertz?
So I am a firm believer of the tight end wasteland. And so once you get beyond Kelsey and Kittle and maybe Andrews and Ertz, I think you are in a barren place. And if I have one of those guys, especially a Zach Ertz, who has led the Eagles in targets both of the last 2 years, and when he was even the 2 years before that, where he was nicked up, he finished second and led them in target share. He's doing it again. Like, he's seeing targets again. I would have been away from Herndon, and especially if it's tight end premium, which I don't know. I mean, I don't have the full league layout, but if it's tight end premium where you're getting, 1.5, or I'm in a couple of leagues with Dynasty Outhouse where he goes 1.75 per catch with a tight end, all of a sudden somebody like Ertz, I'm not giving up Ertz and getting Herndon and two. Look, seconds don't. You can get a second in your draft, in your rookie draft. If you are sitting there, I am a guy, and I hate to take the floor and run with it, but
please do.
I'm a believer in. I want the first round picks, okay, but in season, if somebody says a second round pick will get a trade done, boom, I'm getting rid of it, because in my rookie draft, I know I can sit there and trade you a third and next year's second and get the pick that I want. I did that and grabbed Brian Edwards in a bunch of places this year, because that's you can almost buy on credit with those. So seconds don't interest me, especially now, especially future seconds. Like let's keep Ertz.
I like that. And now I assume that you still stand by that.
Yeah.
Then now it's all the same.
Yeah, and I know Ertz has not been fantastic. I know he's only got 140 yards receiving so far this year, but he's seeing targets. Eventually, Wentz is going to, fix his rectal cranial inversion and remove his head, and things are going to be better for the Eagles and better for Ertz, and that's the side I fall on.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. It's just. Especially after last year, knowing what the Eagles went through as far as the injuries and him being so hyper targeted, and especially as this offseason progressed, and Alshon Jeffrey was dinged up and injured, and JJ Arcega-Whiteside was nowhere to be found. He's on a milk carton somewhere. And then with Rager getting dinged up early, you should have seen that this was coming, that he was going to be a focal point of this offense again. And I know they've got Goddard, but they proved last year that both of them could coexist and do fantasy relevant weeks together. So to give him up for 2 seconds, and Chris Herndon, who I know we like to think he's going to do something, but as long as Gase is there at the head coach of the Jets, it's like, do you really think he's going to do anything? Yeah, I don't like that at all. It's one of the more lopsided ones we've had recently.
Now, see, it's interesting that you brought up the Gase conundrum, because when I was looking at this trade, and you both stayed basically like, well, it is what it is, whether it was 3 months ago or whether it's now, this is an awful trade. And I will not argue that, by the way. This is still a bad trade. However, a few months ago, I think this trade looked so much worse, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I wanted this guy, like, you should have gotten an MRI the next day after submitting this trade for 2 seconds at Chris Herndon. Now, I'm not anti-Zach Ertz still. He's going to get the targets. You're absolutely right about that. I don't know if I'm as confident in him being a top 3 tight end like I just assumed. I assumed he was 3 or 4 regardless coming into this season, and he could still bear that out. It's a long season. We're going to talk about some other things that are related to that further on in the episode. But now we've also seen Chris Herndon be nothing for 4 weeks. But if Adam Gase does get fired, because spoiler alert, we're going to talk about another coach firing here coming up very quickly. If that starts this ball rolling and Gase is out of town, maybe Chris Herndon becomes something, and that's going to maybe salvage your trade for you. But yeah, I still am not a fan of this one.
No, not at all. So Chris Moxley, I'm sorry. This is a bad trade.
But we love you, and please listen and continue submitting.
I would say tune in next year around January. We'll start rolling out the guys you want to pick with those seconds. So
yeah.
God, we need you on every week to promote this podcast.
All right.
All right.
So, Jay, as you alluded to here, we had a head coach firing here 4 weeks into the season. I think everybody was surprised that this firing happened so soon and that Bill O'Brien was the first head coach fired. What do you guys think about this?
Look, it had to happen. It was interesting. I think that conversation between the GM and the coach. Do you think O'Brien just looked in the mirror, flipped himself off, and was like, "You're fired"? You know but the team, the team is in shambles.
Oh.
Like that's the thing is, if I'm a head coach or a hopeful head coach, Houston's not a team that I'm interested in. They don't have their first round pick for like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
They got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. You've got, I mean, their offense is fine, but you're going to have to start paying guys. Like it's gross.
Yeah, same for the GM too. It's like, I think you would want sort of contract that's set up where you're guaranteed, a certain number of years that you're not going to get canned after 2 or 3 seasons, so you can build and get back some of that draft capital that you've lost and dump some of these outrageous contracts they have on their team. It's just a gross situation.
You would almost have to like Sashi Brown it. Where you trade for a bunch of picks and kind of amass that capital 2 or 3 years in the future. I mean, it's almost like what we talk about when we talk about rebuilding dynasty, where Kyle and I will advocate trading for seconds next year if you identify a class 2 years in the future that's going to be really good. So with the Saquon Barkley's class or the 2017 class also, we identified those classes early and said trade for a second in the year before, but trade for firsts, in that draft class and start amassing picks, and people don't really notice what you're doing until it's too late and you have 3 or 4 firsts. That's what you have to do in this situation with Houston, because the cupboard is completely bare.
So doesn't it then have to start? This is where I start to get nervous, because doesn't that amassing of picks have to start with QB? Because what's your most valuable asset is Deshaun Watson. So do we see Deshaun Watson being moved to hopefully what would be, of course, a very fantasy relevant situation? Or does he end up on the Jets? And are we just going to spin our wheels here? I don't know. It's very nebulous. But it's going to be an interesting situation to keep an eye on here. And now, just for the rest of this season, the best possible situation, wouldn't it be akin to 2018 Browns, where you have an interim head coach, I guess, take over possibly, and maybe that sparks something for the offense? You almost have to hope for something like that.
I heard a rumor that O'Brien may stay on as offensive coordinator, though. That's
get out of here.
I've heard that.
That would be the most Bill O'Brien move ever.
I mean, it is. It's insane. But yeah, I think. But again, you look at the fantasy pieces that they have there. Part of the reason why Houston is struggling, part of the reason why Deshaun Watson is struggling, is because it's the inverse to what's happening with Russell Wilson right now. I mean, everybody's been talking about Russell Wilson. Let Russ cook. Well, this year, he's not throwing any more than he ever was, but he's got the groceries to make the meal. I mean, he's got DK Metcalf now. He's still got Tyler Lockett. You've seen him use Chris Carson in the past game. So you've seen that team. And then you turn around and look at Houston. Well, you traded away one of the top 5 receivers in the NFL. You traded for a retread running back, who maybe David Johnson can rekindle that flame, but I don't think so. And you're asking him to do more with less at this point. And so, I mean, maybe a coaching change helps, but to me, it's going to be one of those, like, it helps for a few games. You get that initial boost, like, okay, we're out from underneath Bill O'Brien. He's not doing stupid things, and then you realize, but we still suck, and then it kind of spirals into oblivion.
Oh, right. The rest of us are still just here doing what we've been doing.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Do we have any takes on who's going to be the next coach to go? Anybody want to take a stab at who it should and could be?
I mean, it should have been Gase before he was hired.
Yeah.
I mean,
at this point, though, I wouldn't be surprised if Dan Quinn is the next one fired. I mean, they've got pieces there, and they're just not making it happen. I mean, even last night, as a Packers homer, our defense is nothing to be afraid of right now. Maybe towards the end of the season, it'll kind of come together a little bit more. But right now, it's got so many holes that there's no reason why the Falcons' offense, at least, shouldn't have been able to keep up a bit with the Packers' offense. So the fact that they were only able to put up 16 points is ridiculous.
I mean, they don't have weapons like Robert Tonyan, though. I mean, come on.
This is true.
Who does, really? Can we be honest? Who does? And the thing about that is, like, I really hope that Julio's hamstring injury doesn't buy Dan Quinn time just because, that happens so often where the excuses are made because the skill position guys are out for a game or two, and it's just enough time to let GMs rethink things or overthink things too much. And I hope that's not the case with Dan Quinn, because honestly, my man Matt Ryan deserves better. I just want to say it. As a fantasy advocate of Matt Ryan, he deserves better.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll move on from that. I think we could talk about Bill O'Brien and failing coaches all day long. That's a future episode. But we will go into a brief injury update before getting into the heart of our episode here. As always, we pull our injury updates from Pro Football Reference, so go check them out. Great site. First off, Austin Eckler out tentatively 4 to 6 weeks. Fire up your Joshua Kelly. Nick Chubb, he's out about 6 weeks too. That was not a pretty injury. It was one of those non-contact injuries. I didn't like that. But big bump for Kareem Hunt moving forward. OJ Howard, Achilles out for the season. Sorry, all you OJ Howard truthers out there. It's just done. Mike Evans, questionable for matchup this Thursday with the ankle. I know he did not practice today, so keep an eye on that. Very fast turnaround with the game coming up here in a couple days. Our boy, this one hurts, Alan Lazard. He is out. No timetable for return at this point. That hurts right here in the heart. And then finally, Leonard Fournette, again, with an ankle injury, same as Mike Evans, questionable for Thursday. Keep an eye on that to see if he practices and will be ready to go. Otherwise, be ready to pivot, folks. Anything you guys want to comment on as far as those injuries?
Yeah, the Chubb was an MCL, and everything I've read says sprain, which they're talking he's not going to miss the entire season. That was bad. He got rolled up on. He was blocking. He wasn't even like really part of the play. It was like a backside block, and his offensive lineman rolled a defender up into him. And the Eckler injury, yes, roll out your Josh Kelly, but I think Kelly's still in that Melvin Gordon role. And so perhaps Justin Jackson will come in and catch the ball a little bit. And I'm interested. He's probably a free waiver wire guy right now because everybody who has been a Justin Jackson truther has already been angered enough to cut him for Robert Tonyan, the flavor of the week.
Well, and I was going to say, actually, Justin Jackson is my number one waiver pickup. I know a lot of folks are going to be pivoting towards Dearness Johnson just for the few weeks. I don't know why that is. People are just obsessed with getting any number two there. I kind of get it, but I'm not going to be that guy this week.
Well, and I think people chase the points, which drives me nuts. It's the Kevin Ogletree, back there was probably 2012 when he went off in week one. He had 2 touchdowns and like 140 yards for the Cowboys, and everybody went out and spent all their fab for Kevin Ogletree. And I'm like, no, you're doing this wrong. I said, you're not chasing the past. We want to go after what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And Justin Jackson, I have a lot more faith in, in terms of being a pass catching asset and being able to be at least a reasonable facsimile for that Eckler role.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right. Well, before we venture into the meat of our episode, I just want to say today's episode is brought to you by Restaurant.com. With Restaurant.com, you can save at thousands of restaurants across the country with just a few clicks. Their dining deals range from $5 to $100, never expire, and cost you a fraction of the face value. Dinner has never been easier with Restaurant.com. Used for dine-in, takeout, or delivery. Restaurant.com is offering our listeners 50% off their next purchase by going to www.restaurant.com/podcast. In case you need it spelled out, that's www.restaurant.com/podcast for 50% off. Restaurant.com, the best deal every meal. All right, Dustin.
All right, back at it. So into our rookie review here. 4 weeks into the season, we've seen some highlights out of these rookies. Definitely seen some lowlights. We're just going to go through, pick a handful of players here who we want to talk about, and then if we have time after that, we'll keep talking until we feel like not talking any longer about them. So I don't think there's too much to talk about with the rookie quarterbacks. Joe Burrow's doing, I think, pretty much what everyone expected so far into the season. No real surprises there. He struggled a little bit, but showing definitely flashes of why he was the number one overall pick. I really like Justin Herbert, though. He looks fantastic, and I am really disappointed that I was not able to get any shares of him in the rookie drafts this offseason because, man, he looks really good.
It's funny because Herbert was sliding down boards in my rookie drafts. Like you could get him, late first, sometimes early second, depending on how horny people were for Henry Ruggs and that, type of receiver. But I even saw Tua fall. Like I got Tua at the 5th or 6th pick in several drafts because the running backs were pushed way up. Mm-hmm. Herbert looks like kind of that next Josh Allen type player. And I don't mean to disparage, like Josh Allen is all of a sudden, once they've turned up the volume, proven me wrong. Like I watched Josh Allen in college and I'm like, he's not going to be, he's pretty mobile. He's got a big arm, but I don't believe he's going to be accurate enough for the NFL. And I was 100% wrong on Josh Allen and Herbert. I've got a little bit of an excerpt of what I wrote up on my film notes because I watch film and do notes, and I said Herbert's 6'6", tall, fairly mobile, although he's not really what you deem a running threat, but he's pretty accurate. He can manage a game making underneath throws and checking down, but Herbert also throws absolute piss missiles for deep balls, and arm strength is not going to be an issue. And you saw that twice this past week where he just went over the top on a dime to the receiver in stride for touchdowns. And if he can do that and be as mobile as he is, he's exactly this new generation of NFL quarterback where you can like run pass option, you can design runs, he can get out of trouble. He does a pretty good job resetting his platform, and he really, really surprised me with how quickly he's grown into an NFL quarterback.
So are you suggesting that he's better than Tyrod Taylor? Is that what I'm hearing, that he's a better quarterback?
I'm not claiming medical malfeasance. I'm not suggesting that happened, there was anything nefarious, but it wasn't poking Tyrod in the lung wasn't the worst thing that happened to the Chargers.
It certainly looks like all of those pass catchers especially are going to benefit from him being in there. Of course, Keenan Allen, thank you for letting Keenan Allen be a thing this year because it was not looking good while Taylor was in there, obviously. And I started to get real nervous as somebody who's been trying to get him on all of my rosters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So let's move into running backs because, like I said, quarterbacks, there's really only the two so far to speak of this season. So, Zach, why don't you start us off here with a running back you want to talk about?
I mean, any of them. Let's start with Jonathan Taylor because he was my running back one. And you don't love the usage so far to start. You had the first game where he didn't get many carries and he saw 6 targets, had 6 catches, and that kind of allayed fears that people had with whether or not he could catch the ball. But after the second game where he was just, after Marlon Mack got hurt and Taylor was fed, he had 19 carries and rolled up over 100 yards. The last 2 weeks, he really hasn't seen the volume of carries. And again, I'm not scared. You've seen what he can do, but it's one of those things where we talked before the year on the Dynasty Dummies podcast about the new wave of NFL is doing a lot of running back by committee. They're doing a lot of getting guys rest. They're easing rookies in. I mean, you didn't expect Marlon Mack to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
If Marlon Mack is still there, that's a really congested backfield because you've got Hines, you've got Mack, you've got Taylor, and so to me, I'm still excited about him as a player. I still think he's the best runner in the class, like as terms of pure runner. He really reminds me of Nick Chubb. He's got that like long speed once he breaks one. It's the Adrian Peterson too. That same, but he needs to get carries in order to be fantasy productive. And right now that's not happening. So it's a don't panic. Don't short sell on Jonathan Taylor, but also, you don't have your running back one yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's peculiar. It's just peculiar. And I don't know that anybody envisioned Nyheim Hines being as involved as he's been thus far. I was all about saying don't discount him. He'll get in there and he'll get some touches. He might cipher some targets away. I didn't think he'd be ciphering everything away from him at certain points throughout the game. So the play calling is odd for right now, but it is only 4 games. And I know, Dustin, you and I had both said coming into the season that don't really expect him to get the juices flowing until about halfway through. I think part of that was just the concern overall about rookies this year and how they would integrate into offenses with the bizarre offseason and all that. That really hasn't been the issue. It's just been a very strange bout of play calling so far.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be worried either. I mean, Jake and I, we got our fill of Jonathan Taylor here in Wisconsin. So there was so many games where he would just not do much in the first half, but they would keep feeding him the ball, and then they would wear down that defense. And in the second half, that's where he would start breaking open these 30, 40-yard runs, just taking it to the house. And that's what the Colts have to do. They have to just keep giving him the ball, wearing down those defenses, and he will not let you down.
No, the man ran a 5K in college carrying the ball. Like it's insane.
All right. So, Jake, why don't you give us our next running back?
Well, I want to take us from sort of the top of the class then down to the perceived bottom of the class. And nobody was slighting this guy that I heard. It was just a lot of overlooking, myself certainly included. That was James Robinson. I don't think anybody knew really what to expect from him. Although I do have to give Zach a quick shout out here because I was listening to one of your fairly recent podcasts, and you did mention this was before the Ozigbo injury and all of that, but you said just in terms of a between the tackles guy, he's great. He can do the receiving work. So I have to give you props there because that's bore out. I mean, obviously he was assisted with those injuries in the backfield there, and that cleared the path. But the dude is RB6 through the first 4 weeks on a bad or at least mediocre offense and team in general. No disrespect to the Jaguars, but I don't think anybody was expecting them to light the world on fire. What he's done thus far is honestly kind of crazy because if Leonard Fournette had stuck around and done this exact same thing, I think everybody would be, at least half of the people would be tripping over themselves to say, look at, I thought he could do, something close to this. And now James Robinson is doing much more than I think Fournette could have done in this offense. And it's still just a lot of skepticism. And some of that is healthy, of course, to have. But I just think that this guy's immediate future, at least, I mean, for this year, I don't see a way that he falls outside of my personal top 12 for the rest of this year. And if the Jags do what I think the Jags would like to do, which is not invest too heavily in that position, I say, give him a chance next year. And I'm not projecting a 10-year run with James Robinson lighting up the scoreboards, but I'm really interested to see what he looks like here at the end of the season.
It's really that Austin Eckler kind of archetype where you have the injury, you have the availability, you have the carries and the touches available to, and that was the thing. Like we watched James Robinson at Illinois State. We watched him in the preseason. I have a write-up on him, and basically my write-up says he's very good. The combine showed that he is athletic enough to be an NFL back. And the question is going to be, what's his draft capital and can he get on a field? And to sit here, I can't tell you that I could have predicted him to be running back 6 because that's way out of the realm. Like I'm not Nostradamus. Like I said, full disclosure, I am a dummy. We own it in the show name, and we try to raise up our misses because I feel like you can learn more from them. But James Robinson, the reason why we were on James Robinson, the reason why you talked about, me in the preseason talking about adding James Robinson to your roster is because, I missed on Eckler. It's because I missed on his name escapes me now, but the other running back in Denver.
Philip Lindsay.
So those types of players, you got to get in early. You can't mess around because somebody's going to pick them up, and especially once they come in and do something. And so James Robinson was that archetype of player where you look at, okay, Fournette is gone. You've got a chance for him to come in and take over a backfield, be both a pass catcher and a runner, and he can do both of those things. He showed that in college, albeit at a small school. And so, it's touches and targets drive fantasy points. If he's running into touches and targets, then that's a win. Mm-hmm. Free money.
You got that right.
All right. So I've got a couple running backs I just want to touch on briefly here and kind of get your guys' thoughts on long-term, more instead of this season, because we haven't seen a lot from either of these guys, although one of them showed out a little bit this last week. So the first one I want to talk about is Keyshawn Vaughn. He kind of had an up and down offseason here with the draft and draft capital and all that, going to Tampa Bay, with Leonard Fournette getting signed there, Ronald Jones. But he did show out a little bit this week. Obviously, he is not the main guy, and I'm just kind of curious, do we think he could be the long-term answer there in Tampa Bay? Are they going to hang on to Fournette after this season? Kind of long-term prospects for him. I honestly don't think we're going to see much more than flashes out of him the rest of this season, kind of like we saw this last week, unless there's injury in front of him. But I'm kind of curious, again, long-term, after this season, what we think of him.
So what I'd really like to see is them use Keyshawn Vaughn in the passing game, because I think that is Ronald Jones's weakness in terms of, and I've never been a Ronald Jones guy, but it's because I focus so much on pass catching running backs. Ronald Jones is very dynamic. If you can get him in space, he is very quick. He's that kind of one cut go, like, house one. The problem is he plays like a scat back and doesn't have great hands. And so having a guy like Keyshawn Vaughn, who was adequate in the passing game in college, I always look for collegiate running backs to have 20 catches in a season, and it's not necessarily predictive in the like metric like sense of the word, but I do think that NFL coaches are not particularly creative, and if they see a guy do something in college, they know he can do it in the NFL. And so I always kind of liken it to you're not going to develop toast. If you want toast, you're going to go out and buy a toaster and make toast. You're not going to go buy matches and some wood and start a fire and then try to hold toast over the fire. Like, you're going to go buy a toaster and make toast. And so I think the same holds true with running backs. You see guys who caught the ball in college, and that translates to the NFL because NFL coaches are like, yeah, you caught it, we'll do that. They don't want to test something out when their job is on the line. And so I think that if Keyshawn Vaughn can carve out a role where the dust of LaShawn McCoy has kind of vacated, then that will work out. Is Keyshawn Vaughn a guy who's going to come in and take over a backfield? No, I don't think so, but I think he does complement Ronald Jones pretty well. And that could be an asset where next year, if Ronald Jones gets nicked up and Keyshawn Vaughn is taking some passing role, we call those pass catcher pluses because he can step in and carry the workload for you 2 or 3 weeks. And if he does, that's a week winner. And if he's just getting the passing down work, that's a flex play.
So you're saying he's next year's Nyheim Hines?
He very well could be. Although, I always it's not necessarily Nyheim Hines because I don't think Nyheim Hines carries the ball quite as well as Vaughn. But it's that. I mean, it's the Gio Bernard. It literally is a guy who, maybe he's not quite a bell cow, but in a pinch he'll do.
Mm-hmm. Right. First of all, can I just say that your toast analogy was one of the favorite things that I've heard in recent memory. So kudos on that. Speaking of coaching in general here, I am a little nervous about who he ended up with as his coach. Bruce Arians has proven to be one of the flightier coaches in recent times. And I don't believe it was always that way, but there's something about him now. And maybe I'm reading too much into the blurbs and some of his phrasings on things, but he's very much, people like to talk about the Belichick backfields and how impossible those were to detect, but Bruce Arians is not that far off. He's truly not. And so, yes, if Keyshawn Vaughn does not fart in his general direction for that week, then cool, you can fire him up and he'll be involved in that game plan. But if he does anything wrong in practice as a rookie, because I think that Arians has that in him of, I'm going to be tougher on the rookies. And also, he just doesn't fuck around. That guy does not have the mentality and ability to withstand that. So with all of that said, I think if Keyshawn Vaughn proves himself enough times in a row, then Arians will not be an issue. It's just if there is that back and forth at all where he has an off game, then I'm going to be wondering for the next week, what kind of role is Vaughn actually going to have? That's my only concern, but I agree. I think there is room for him to be the pass catcher there, and I hope he gets a shot.
Yeah, same here. And then the other one I want to talk about here real briefly is Darrynton Evans. I think we kind of expected him to have a bigger role than he's had so far to start the season, especially since, again, Derrick Henry is not known to be a pass catcher, and they got rid of Dion Lewis. So they need someone out of that backfield to be able to catch the ball, but it doesn't seem like he's been super involved so far, or as much as maybe I expected him to be involved. Any thoughts on that?
I didn't love Evans coming out of school. I thought, he was fine. And you also expected 2 years ago Dion Lewis to come in and take stuff away from Derrick Henry, and so you've just kind of seen what Tennessee does, and they're going to feed the big man as many times as they can. And so between the fact that I wasn't that high on Evans coming out, and you've got the precedent set of Derrick Henry they're not throwing the ball to running backs very often. And Derrick Henry is going to get most of the carries. So I don't know. He's not necessarily, and plus draft capital. I mean, that's the other thing that we kind of forget about in season. But coaches don't forget about it. And the player personnel department of NFL teams don't forget about it. And it's really difficult to, as a player who comes in and gets drafted in the 4th or 5th round, it's really difficult to come in and it's not insurmountable, but to crack that lineup, to get playing time and get significant enough playing time for fantasy football, it's really tough. And you're also one of the first guys on the way out, next year when they draft the next big thing, the flavor of the month. So.
Mm-hmm. And that injury didn't help him at all. And it would be true for really any rookie that's coming in when you have to deal with an injury early on and you don't get that playing time right out of the gate. It's tough, So now we've got, very, very limited sample size. But Zach, it's funny what you said, because honestly, I had hopes that Evans would be basically 2018 Dion Lewis, which wasn't great. By the way, it was not great. It was much improved over 2019 Dion Lewis because he actually did get some targets in that offense. But now, you're seeing Derrick Henry is actually getting targeted a good bit, at least for what Derrick Henry is used to. 8 targets through 3 games is not too shabby for him. And so if that's their plan of attack and they figure out a way to keep him on the field even more, it's going to be tough going for Evans. But I don't know. I wouldn't give up on him. If you can get him for pennies, I'd be interested. So that going forward for next year, you could have a shot at a fresh start, I guess.
The thing I will say, though, about Evans is it's really weird. It was like watching Devin Singletary 2 years ago, where you expect him. He's not a big guy. You expect him to be a pass catcher, but he's more of a between the tackles guy than he is a scat back. And so it's not really the foil that they needed for Derrick Henry. So.
Mm-hmm. Fair. All right. Before we move on to wide receivers here, we got a question in the chat. Should I do OBJ and Mike Davis for Derrick Henry and Julio Jones? It's a full PPR league.
I'm nervous about Julio. I'm going to come out and say it. I have Julio rostered, and that hamstring I got real twitchy during that Packers and Falcons game on Monday night, seeing him just kind of all of a sudden fade out, and then he was back in the locker room without really much said about it. That's why the Packers kept Adams out. They kept saying that is to avoid what just happened with Julio. And now the edge cliff might be overblown. But I like OBJ. I've been saying for a while, I needed OBJ to have basically his blow-up game. So he's not a guy I would be selling high on, so to speak, personally.
The only caveat I would have to that is Mike Davis. Okay, so CMC is coming back eventually. It's a high ankle sprain. I mean, it's the same thing that Kamara and Barkley dealt with last year. I do think that comeback presents potentially a buy low window on CMC, because I think when he comes back, he's not going to be what you think of as Christian McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. But I'm not trading for Mike Davis right now, especially if I'm giving up, if I'm giving up Derrick Henry, who I think is a very good. I mean, he doesn't do it in the way that I traditionally build my running back room, but he does it, and he's that outlier. He's the guy who's going to get 300 carries and be a top 10 running back. And then the potential of adding Julio Jones if he gets healthy, say the Falcons could sit him out now. I mean, they're 0-4. It doesn't really matter. Like, what are you doing? So I think I would, but he says he has CMC too. That might change things. Because then you're getting whatever you're getting from. You basically make one player out of Mike Davis and CMC. So I don't know. It's
basically, do you believe that at some point in this season that CMC is going to come back and be healthy? Because my other thought was, and I think we maybe talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Dustin, was what happens if the Panthers are doing abysmal midseason, and then do you risk bringing CMC back? I don't know. They did look pretty fantastic this weekend, so they might not be in the bad situation that I thought they would be. So they might have an actual reason to bring CMC back. So yeah, that's interesting. For me, it is basically just OBJ versus Henry for the most part. But if you look at it that way, then it is Julio above Mike Davis. So if you're just doing the X's and O's, yeah, I could definitely see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seeing how he has CMC, maybe not the worst trade in the world. Like we were saying, just kind of lock up that backfield. Then you're guaranteed the points in one form or another if you choose correctly as CMC's coming back. I don't hate it. It's actually fairly pretty fair in my book. So So I guess just go with your heart there, Connor. We don't have good answers.
We've given you no assistance at all in this trade. You're welcome, Connor.
But thanks for watching.
That's right. So on the wide receivers, Zach, I'll throw it to you for your wide receiver.
We talked about this pre-show. I hate victory laps. Hate them with a passion. It's one of my least favorite things about Twitter. And having said that, I am going to 100% just shoot the moon victory lap on Justin Jefferson, who was my wide receiver 2 in this class. And if I had any balls, he would have been my wide receiver 1. No, I liked CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb's fantastic. But I think that, you saw him come out in the first 2 games. He was only targeted 3 times in each of those. Since then, you saw 9 targets in week 3, 7 targets in week 4. He had over 100 yards in both of those games. I mean, he had 174, I think, in week 3 with that big 71-yard touchdown catch. He's currently ranked 8th right now in the NFL in receiving yards as a rookie. He's currently ranked number 1 in Pro Football Focus's wide receiver rankings. Arif Hansen, I think it's Arif Hansen, NFL. He's a Vikings writer, so I apologize to you guys, you Packers fans, but
we'll allow it.
He said that Jefferson is the only player in the last 10 years to have more receiving yards. The only player to have more receiving yards in the first 4 games in the last 10 years as a rookie is Diggs. He's the only player in the last 10 years to have more receiving yards in his first 4 games. And Justin Jefferson didn't even play in the first 2. Like, yeah, man. Like, and now's the part where I come back to reality, because we've victory lapped. We've had the fun. If you're rostering him, congratulations. Like, look, take out your headphones, stop listening to this, close your eyes and picture that touchdown that he had where he beat 2 defenders and just kind of like shimmied into the end zone. But you also have to understand that what's happening right now is not sustainable. I mean, there's no way he's going to put up a 100-yard game every game as a rookie. It just doesn't happen. But he is a stud. He is an absolute stud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he sure is. I mean, and that with Thielen there, I mean, with the 2 of them, it's just great compliments of each other to get that single coverage. I mean, you got to pick your poison then at that point. And then with Dalvin Cook in the backfield, I mean, the Vikings did well. They got rid of Diggs and then brought in another stud. I mean, I hate to say it, and I hate to give them props like that, but that was a really nice pick by them.
And the thing I took so much flack for with Jefferson is, you saw him play a lot in the slot in college, and I had this. It was very similar to AJ Brown 2 years ago, where I'm watching him. And I'm like, yeah, he's playing a lot in the slot, but when he gets outside, he can beat press coverage. He's got double moves. He can beat man. Justin Jefferson is one of the best players I have watched. I've been scouting. We'll put air quotes around it, but I've been watching film for fantasy football for the last 7 years or so. And Justin Jefferson, maybe Juju Smith-Schuster, but Justin Jefferson is the best player I have watched at figuring out what a zone is doing and figuring out the soft spots and stopping in those soft spots, which is what you need. You need to create a throwing lane for your quarterback. Zones are cheats, and there's a hole in all of them. And he does that. And everyone was like, oh, he's just a slot receiver. He's just a slot receiver. I said, no, he can slide outside. This last game, he played 8 snaps in the slot and 43 on the outside. And he had 100 yards.
Now, I was especially nervous about him coming in at this early point because I was nervous about the passing volume. How much would be there in that offense? Thinking that they're going to be run heavy, which they have been technically. They I believe it's 113 rush attempts to 100 pass attempts. So yeah, they are, but it doesn't really matter. And speaking about AJ Brown, I've had similar reservations about AJ Brown in the past. I just need to stop thinking so much about the pass volume clearly, because if the talent is there and there's not a ton of competition, which I think is also crucial there. Yes, Thielen, great. Nothing against Thielen at all. The tight ends are not as involved as I think a lot of people expected them to be. And so he doesn't have a lot going against him. and the talent is just chef's kiss all over.
That's it. And I think that's the key for wide receiver. It is, running back, you look at situation, you want them to come in and have a job right away, because the shelf life of running back is not very long, and the window to actually become a starting running back and be fantasy productive is not very long at all. I mean, it's maybe 3 years, maybe. And if you haven't put up, then you're done. With wide receivers, to me, it's so much more about talent. Even a guy like Corey Davis, who, has not done what everybody thought he was going to do, if he ends up on another team and has a chance to get that volume again, I mean, he had a season where he was seeing almost 30% of the targets in Tennessee. There weren't many targets, but that's the thing with the receivers. And to me, when I scout receivers, I'm looking for three things. I'm looking for a player who can attract big volume. Justin Jefferson did that. I mean, he had 111 catches at LSU his last year. I'm looking for a guy who can make big plays. So that's the boom, kind of the Deshaun Jackson, the Tyreek Hill, that type of player, because those get you points too. You have to be efficient, but they'll get you points. Or I need somebody who can get open in the red zone and score touchdowns, because those are the three ways you score points in fantasy. You either need catches, you need yards, or you need touchdowns. And Justin Jefferson can do all three of those. To me, that's a no-brainer lock.
Agreed. This is just me uncovering all of my warts here and how I don't think things through sometimes with these guys. Because I am so much of that guy who's like, you know what I just need? I need Jarvis Landry. I need Jarvis Landry on my team so I know he's going to get 15 targets a game, and I don't have to worry about how talented or deserving of those targets he is. He's just going to get them. Or Jamison Crowder. I need that, just all the volume. Give it to me. And sometimes that causes you to overlook a guy in this type of situation who's going to do it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Jake, who do you have for a wide receiver?
Well, this one is a bummer because I think a lot of us had anticipated a little bit more action than we've gotten. But Laviska Shenault, wide receiver for the Jags, it's going to be fine. It's just not going to be fine soon enough for a lot of folks. You've seen some of the rookie mistakes really shine through already this early. Those can be remedied. It's not a big deal, but in some of those high-profile situations where they needed him to catch the ball, he couldn't do it. And some of it was just that natural perception. Those instincts aren't quite there. And you have to have sharp instincts if you're playing with a quarterback like Gardner Minshew, because he demands that kind of thing from you as a pass catcher. And it's just not there yet. So my outlook for him remains basically the same. It's just pushed down the road. I think by the end of this season, you'll have a much truer gauge of what to expect out of him going forward. They need a guy like him there. I stand by that. I think that he would be the best thing for that offense. He's gonna grow into my kind of guy, which I think is a ball hog. I think he's going to become that, but he's just not there now. So for now, I'm bummed, but I'm hopeful.
See, I got a little bit of a different take on Shenault, because I didn't expect him to be as involved in an offense as he is already. I mean, you've seen him get 20 targets in the first 4 games. You've seen him get 9 carries in the first 4 games. And the thing to me, and that's what I said, the downside of Shenault is that he's really raw. He looks out of place when he's being pressed or has solid man coverage. He just doesn't know what to do. He was, even in college, was unable to create separation, and so much so that on 3rd and long, or you saw 4 or 5 where they went for it on 4th down, he wasn't even the first or second read in college. And so I'm heartened that the Jags are really trying to get him involved, because I think that's what you've got to do with him. Like, he is a Mack truck when he's got the ball. Like, he's a running back, man. He's so big and so athletic and so strong. but he just doesn't quite know what to do with it yet in terms of getting open down the field. And so I think you're going to have to do, it's kind of like what the Patriots are doing with N'Keal Harry. You've kind of got to figure out, okay, we can run you on bubble screens. We can pull a guard and get you a little blocking, and you can use your athleticism. But right now you're not a downfield guy. You may be. I mean, I think that Shenault tracked the ball as well as any player in this class on deep balls. It was just a matter of getting open on them. Like he doesn't have the polish yet. He just doesn't. And it's tough to learn in the NFL, but getting on the field is how you learn, and he's doing that. So
that's true. I dial up 10 end arounds for him a game. I don't give a shit. Just get the ball in his hands and let him pummel. Let him be that big aggressive guy that we all know and love and want him to be for that team.
I tell you, I would even wildcat at the goal line. Just take Minshew out and just say, "All right, Visca, go for it," because he did that. He did that in college, and he was great at it.
I love it. Let's see more Laviska Shenault in the backfield 20. Although I don't want it to take too much away from James Robinson, of course. So double-edged sword there.
Yeah, who knew there would be a plethora of offensive weapons here on the Jags? All right, I want to talk T. Higgins here real quickly. I didn't think he would be quite as involved as he has been. And I know it hasn't been super consistent so far, but the fact that he's been involved as he has been here to start the season is really encouraging. I don't think anybody really questioned the talent. And I think we all like the landing spot with the young quarterback there, Joe Burrow. They can kind of grow together in that offense. I don't know what to expect the rest of this season. I think it kind of depends if AJ Green stays healthy or not. I think once AJ Green is out of the picture, I mean, it is just giddy up and go with this offense. I mean, as they continue to grow together, it's going to be really fun for a long time to watch them. And T. Higgins is just going to ball out. I'm so excited for him moving forward.
The Bengals offense this offseason was so strange. And I'll be the first to admit, we talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast in the offseason. I projected nothing for these guys. I really didn't see a path to them being incredibly fantasy viable just because of all the question marks there. Rookie quarterback, also offensive line that was supposed to be salvaged by, a former first round pick that didn't play yet. All these things. And then the most prominent thing this offseason seemed to be the too many mouths to feed argument for T. Higgins was, well, where is he going to fall on that depth chart? Because it's AJ Green and it's Tyler Boyd and it's Alden Tate and John Ross. And that has all just basically washed away at this point, which is awesome to see. We don't have to wait. I don't think we actually have to wait for AJ Green to get injured because, one, I think he's always kind of perpetually injured. But two, I just don't think it matters that much. I think Higgins is earning the trust. It looks like to me, at least from my untrained eye, that he's earning that trust. And I hope he sees those 7 target games all season long.
Well, that's what he's got 22 targets in 3 games. I mean, that's what he's doing is 7 targets a game. This is going to be, he's probably going to be my biggest miss because I had him in the second round of my rookie drafts. I think I hit him around 14 or 15 overall. And watching him play, you kind of, I mean, maybe it's because he was at Clemson and followed Mike Williams, but you saw a lot of those same things where he was really good at the back shoulder throw, but is that a function of just being a big guy? That in Dabo Sweeney's offense, like, is that what you're doing? Like, and so I watched them. Those big kind of prototypical X type receivers aren't generally my bag because it takes a lot to drive the volume to those types of players, especially in the NFL now where they've actually started shifting. Peter Howard. I have a DM always going with Peter Howard because I am not a math guy. I am a film guy, and I know that there is tremendous value in numbers. And so I pick his brain all the time. And he actually has a slot rate spreadsheet going for me that I have access to. And if you look at the trend in the last 4 years, the trend is your better receivers are spending more time in the slot. They've realized that you can create matchup problems from the slot. So, like Juju Smith-Schuster slides in the slot. Even DeAndre Hopkins, like his slot rate went up. Like it's a really strange. I mean, it's not strange. It's actually brilliant because you're creating matchups on the interior with your better receivers against slot corners. And that's not what Higgins does. And so he was a guy that I'm going to miss on because I actually think that he's now a buy. I think that you can see a path to him being the 1A to Tyler Boyd's 1B when AJ Green goes away. And I mean, you look at what Auden Tate did last year where, he was actually viable. I think you got a better quarterback, and T. Higgins is a better version of whatever Auden Tate is. Mm-hmm. So that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% there. So that leaves us with tight ends. None of the rookies really fantasy relevant. I don't know if either of you really want to touch on any of these rookie tight ends as far as path going forward this season or maybe long-term.
Adam Troutman has a shot to be something. That's all I'm going to say about this entire tight end class for this year. Adam Troutman has a chance this year. A lot just has to break his way, but he could be a guy.
Yeah, I mean, I like Troutman coming out. I liked Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue coming out. But if you are, I mean, first of all, if you're counting on rookies to win your league this year, you're doing this wrong unless it's a running back. And if you're counting on a tight end to do it in the first 3 years of their career, you're doing it wrong. I mean, this is the time to go get Gesicki. I mean, or it was before the season. Like this was the time to go get Jonnu Smith. This was the time to go get those guys who've been in the league a few years who are now going to ascend into the top 12. Because I mean, it's like we started off the show with the tight end. You don't want to draft tight ends 5 through 10 in ADP because 4 of those guys are not going to be in the top 10. You want to draft the 4 guys who are going between 15 and 25 who are going to be in the top 10. And that's how you play tight end. I mean, it's the Mo Alley Cox. I have so much Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox on my rosters because that was a team that I was sitting there going, Phillip Rivers is going to use a tight end. I didn't expect it to be Mo Alley Cox, but he's really athletic. And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to get both of them because they're both free. And that's how I played tight end. I have so much of those, or so many of those back end tight ends that you look at and you're like, oh, I don't want to start them. But then all of a sudden you realize that the difference between tight end 6 and tight end 16 is like a point a game. Right. I mean, a point a week in fantasy. Like, okay, so why am I paying up to get those tight ends? So I don't have anything to say about the rookies. We'll reconvene in 3 years and we'll talk about how good Troutman and Bryson Hopkins are to be your next sleeper tight ends.
Perfect. We'll just pencil you in now, and then we'll play.
Yeah. I'll get you in the calendar.
Perfect. All right. Well, then, any other of these rookies, whether it's running back, wide receiver, that we didn't touch upon that you want to talk about briefly here?
I got a couple. Can we just real quick bask in CeeDee Lamb and realize that he is going to be a wide receiver 1 for years?
Uh-huh.
And if you got him, if he got pushed down by running backs in your draft class, in your rookie draft, and so he went behind Hilaire, he went behind Jonathan Taylor. If he was going behind Swift and Dobbins, you got an absolute steal. And sometimes he was going behind Akers because everybody is, all in on running backs now. This is the new wave. We have to draft 14 running backs in the first 2 rounds of Dynasty and in Superflex. I mean, like you got like 3 quarterbacks, 14 running backs and Kelsey, and then, 4 wide receivers. Like, what are we doing? But man, CD Lamb, I had again, Peter Howard and I had this conversation, and I said, Peter, I need to run something by you because I feel crazy. And I said, Amari Cooper and Gallup are still in Dallas. So Cooper saw 119 targets last year, and Gallup saw 113. Cobb and Witten are gone. They both saw 83 targets. I said, a logical leap is that Lamb is probably going to play the slot primarily because both Gallup and Cooper, I have my slot rate chart. They were both under 11% for their entire career in the slot. And CD Lamb had played 50% in college. I said, so, okay. So Lamb, I think, is better than Gallup. I think he's much better than Cobb in terms of talent. I don't think Jarwin, who's now gone, is as good as Witten. So all of a sudden, I'm sitting there looking at that Dallas receiving corps saying there could be 3 guys between 110 and 130 targets. And I'm not going to be shocked if CD Lamb is the second. And he's like, no, you're crazy. And I'm like, Peter, you're the one who says targets go to talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you lost him at vacated targets. You know that's not how you should have approached it.
He's a Gallup guy, and he's always been a Gallup guy, and Gallup is good. And I can't argue with that. But CD Lamb is next level good. Like Gallup was like end of the first round, early second round rookie pick. Like I'm looking at him going, hey, he's okay. But CD Lamb, I'm watching him and saying, CD Lamb is the number 1 player in this class, and I love Justin Jefferson. Like, and CD Lamb blows him out of the water. Like what CD Lamb did in college, man. And then if Amari Cooper moves on, you got the number 1.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that you said Blake Jarwin is not as good as Jason Witten, but I am on board with the rest of your take.
Jason Witten was a tight end 1 again last year. I know because I ran him out there.
Yeah, that's because Dak Prescott literally just ran up and handed him the ball and then pushed him over, but that counted as a catch, and so he got like 100 of those, and then he was fine.
Yeah. But yeah, no, like that's. I mean, and Prescott, man, they're letting Prescott just fire the ball. I mean, their defense is terrible. I mean, Odell Beckham just ran for 73 yards on him. So, like,
well, it's a typical Mike McCarthy offense. Let's be honest. Good offense, bad defense. Throw the ball 1,000 times.
Yep.
But no, CD Lamb, man, I going in, the talent was undeniable, but I did not think he would flash this early in the season. Again, I typically am one of those fade the rookie wide receivers until the second half of the season, until they get acclimated to the NFL, learn their position, a little bit better. But yeah, he's just stepped right in, and he's just a man. Oh, yeah, and it is fun to watch. It really is.
Well, and the great part about him is not only is he a fantastic receiver, but watch him on a play where they run the ball to his side, and he is laying the cornerbacks out. Like, he will get in and stick his nose in blocking. I absolutely love him. I mean, he's got that dog in him where, like, a lot of wide receivers you see, they're divas, and they're like, yeah, well, I'm going to get in front of a defender, but I'm not going to really. Like, Lamb will hit you. Lamb will pop you in the mouth and then beat you down the field on the next play. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you have one more for us?
I got 2 more deep guys. All
right. Lay it on us.
So Darnell Mooney is my most owned player in Dynasty right now, because in the 5th round of every rookie draft I had, I'm looking around and I'm like, yeah, Darnell Mooney's still there. He's got a little bit of Jarvis Landry in him, but he runs a 4.3. And, he's actually seen some targets with the Bears. I'm not sold on Anthony Miller. If the Bears figure things out with their offense and at quarterback, and it wouldn't surprise me in a year or 2 to see Darnell Mooney surpass Miller as the 2. And he's free. I mean, he may be on your waiver wire depending on how deep your league is. But he's just, again, it's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a guy who can either generate volume, which maybe he can, but have big plays. And he can do that because he's got that 4.3 speed. And if you watched any of him in college, there are a few plays where he would catch the ball in the flat, make a defense. I mean, like teleported on a defender. The defender's gone, and then he's 4.3 down the sideline, and it's just like, what just happened? And you're like, well, okay, Darnell Mooney's all right. And I think that he's a player that not many people talked about before the season. I don't think he's a player that too many people are talking about now, but he's a player that I want on the back end of my dynasty teams, because I feel like you clog up the back end of your roster. Like I had rosters where I still had like Hollywood Higgins. I had rosters where I've got just guys you're never going to play. So why not take a shot on somebody like Darnell Mooney, who's got that potential to, eventually maybe be a 2. And the other one, I'm just going to slide right into it because I can, is Gabriel Davis with the Bills. And again, the Bills look like a really crowded spot. And before this season, I would have told you to pound sand, because I never thought that I would see the day where Josh Allen was throwing for 300 yards.
Right.
In a game, let alone 4 games in a row. Like, I didn't anticipate this volume, but he's been quietly good in that really crowded receiving room. So you've got Diggs, you've got John Brown, you've got Peter Howard's doppelganger running out of the slot, and Cole Beasley. But if you look at John Brown's contract, John Brown is signed through 2021, but next year he's only like a 1.3 or 1.2 against the cap, and it would be about an $8 million savings if they cut him. And I'm not saying they will, because he's a good player, but if Gabriel Davis kind of shows out, you've got that option as the Bills to cut $8 million off your salary, continue to put pieces in front of Josh Allen, continue to build that defense, and slide Gabriel Davis in there as a viable deep threat. So he's another player that is basically free. That, I like the situation, and I don't dislike the talent. And you put those two things together, and that's not a bad free play.
So Gabriel Davis could end up being what people wanted Robert Foster to be from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, not a one-for-one comparison there, but just from a fantasy perspective, where people were willing to eat him up on the back end of their rosters for weeks, months, seasons, whatever, until he was finally cut away. So I love those deep bench stashes, especially when you're talking about rookie wide receivers. So I love that you brought up those 2 names. I had thought about mentioning Quintez Cephas as that kind of guy, but I'm still, it's like you got to see him at least slide in and produce right away when given the opportunity. It's like, whoa, I didn't expect to see that happen.
Cephas is a bully.
So yeah, he really will throw a guy around. So that's nice to see. Again, not just the Wisconsin homer in me, but certainly that doesn't hurt. And Marvin Jones is probably not long for the NFL for too much longer. I'm not trying to cut his career away from him here, but you just add up those timelines, and I'm kind of psyched for him too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's a great call. I think Cephas, his path is kind of Preston Williams-ish, because you had the off-field issues, although the court thing kind of went away, got dismissed, but that was kind of a black cloud hanging over him, and I think that hurt his draft stock. I think it hurt everybody. Kind of stopped looking at him, and it's hard because you get in fantasy, you have all of the people looking at metrics. Well, if you have a player who didn't play for a significant portion of seasons, then the metrics are all kind of hinky. That's the technical term for it,
for sure.
And so you have to rely on film, and like watching him on film in the few games that you got of him, you're like, wow, like he's a man among boys, man. Like he'll go up and get it. He'll out physical you, like. And he even did that in the first game of the season with the Lions. Like, he was throwing guys. You're like, okay, I see you, Quintez.
Yeah, I like to see that too. Obviously, as a Wisconsin Badger fan, always good to see your team produce NFL caliber players. But yeah, I did not expect him to jump in right out of the gate like this and show out like he did. I thought he was going to be more of maybe a couple year project, couple years down the road. Then he, like you were saying, Jake, after Marvin Jones maybe leaves the team, then he would step into that number 2 role. So it's good to see that he flashed it and he can play at that NFL level, and hopefully he continues to grow, and we can get him snagged up on a few more of my teams before he blows up. All right. So I feel like this was a good episode. What do you
I think you're underselling it. I think this was a great episode, personally.
I had a blast. I mean, this was, but talking rookies, man, and coming in, hanging out with you guys. I mean, we've interacted some, and that's what you said, Jake, when you messaged me. You said, I've always enjoyed our interactions on Twitter. And I'm like, well, yeah, let's do this. Like, I'm all about, like, I always find that, you get on a show with people and all of a sudden you realize you're like, oh, it's been an hour and a half, and you're like, sitting there talking like your old buddies hanging out at the bar, and it's not much better way to spend a Tuesday, I don't think.
It's the beauty of football, and especially fantasy football, man.
That's right. So just one last note here before we sign off. We do have our first bye weeks coming up, folks. We have Green Bay and Detroit both on bye this week, so please take them out of your lineups. Do not start them. They will not get you any points. So just be aware of that, please. So, Zach, thanks again for coming to join us. Why don't you tell us one more time where folks can find you?
Yeah, I am at Tacit Assassin 13 on Twitter. You can find me over at my home at the DFPN at work. It's the only at work in town, and I am the lesser half of the Dynasty Dummies. You should be following Kyle, who's at Caleb Breck. He's much better than I am. I'm just the guy who hits the softballs. He does all the pitching. So.
Yeah, and if you guys aren't listening to their podcast, it is great. It's one of the first Dynasty podcasts I came across. So I've been following you guys for quite some time now, and you guys are awesome. So it was really big for me to have you on our show here because, like I said, I've been following you now for a few years, and you guys put out just great content all the time. So keep up that great work. We do appreciate it.
We're just a couple of dummies, man, but I appreciate it.
And stop underselling yourself. You are an equal half of that podcast. You and Kyle both deliver the goods.
All right, Jake, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Jake Trowbridge.
And you can find our podcast at Drinking Fantasy on Twitter, and find me at FF Dusty Dog on Twitter. And until next week, folks, keep drinking and talking fantasy football.
Cheers, FFers.